Hey guys, tonight we drift back into the plush corridors of Spain's darkest palace, where velvet curtains hide more than just dusty paintings and forgotten heirlooms. You pad silently over the marble floors of a place that smells like old perfume and wet ink. Tonight, you're here not to marvel at grandeur, but to meet the man history keeps trying to forget. His name? Ferdinand II. You've probably never heard of him in school. Textbooks usually skip his sleazier habits. But don't worry, we're not skipping anything tonight. This isn't your average story about kings and crowns. This one's got secret passageways, moaning servants, wildly inappropriate hobbies, and one of the creepiest bedroom reputations in royal history. You'll laugh, you'll cringe, you'll ask yourself why monarchy was ever a thing. And yes, you probably won't survive this, at least not without raising your eyebrows a few times. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. Let's see where this bedtime tale is whispering tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are standing in the Royal Palace of Madrid, a building so grand it's practically allergic to humility. In the flicker of candlelight, a heavy painting glares down at you. It's Ferdinand II, wrapped in a red velvet cape, looking like someone who demands breakfast in bed at 4 p.m. And somehow, it's not the cape or the double chin that bothers you. It's the eyes. That smug, squinty gaze like he knows things he absolutely should not know. Born in 1784, Ferdinand was the kind of baby who cried not because he was hungry, but because his toys weren't gold-plated. His parents were King Charles IV and Queen Maria Luisa. But everyone in the palace whispered that Manuel Godoy, the Queen's favorite advisor, was doing more than just policy reviews. Historians still argue whether Ferdinand was actually Godoy's son, but let's just say no one passed around cigars with any confidence. From a young age, Ferdinand was trained for the throne. And by trained, we mean spoiled rotten. Tutors were dismissed if they frowned. If you taught him Latin but forgot dessert, you were exiled. You're not raising a king here, you're creating a grown-up toddler with a crown fetish. By 14, he already had a palace full of servants who weren't allowed to speak unless spoken to, which, considering his personality, meant they rarely risked opening their mouths. By 16, he was taking notes not from scholars, but from the sycophants in his mother's perfume-drenched salons. There were no deep philosophical debates, just deep dives into gossip and manipulation. Now picture this. Outside the palace walls, Spain is a hot mess. The Enlightenment is sweeping Europe. People are talking about liberty, reason, and the rights of man. Meanwhile, inside the royal nursery, Ferdinand is ordering his chef to remove all the peas from his stew because they look judgmental. He's not stupid, though. He's watching the French Revolution unfold like a horror film. Heads rolling, monarchs executed, entire dynasties erased. He decides early that if anyone tries that in Spain, he's going to out-paranoid them all. So you keep walking. You turn a corner and stumble into one of his private studies. The furniture's over-decorated, the wallpaper's peeling just slightly, and there's a distinct smell of cigar smoke and candle wax. A journal lies open on the desk. No, you can't resist. You peek. It's not poetry or politics. It's a list of grievances, names underlined. Servants he suspects of silent disrespect. One was fired because he yawned. Even as a prince, Ferdinand's ambition outweighs his sense. He starts a secret campaign to undermine his own father. Yes, you heard right. He's planning a palace coup from his nursery. He writes flattering letters to Napoleon Bonaparte behind his parents' backs, hoping France will support him as a better ruler. That's like asking a lion to help you babysit your hamster. Napoleon, being Napoleon, pretends to play nice. Meanwhile, Spain's court is cracking apart like overbaked flan. The people hate Godoy. They're not crazy about Charles 404 either, and they definitely don't know what to make of Ferdinand, this moody, sniveling prince who sulks whenever he's told no. By 1807, the tension explodes. There's an uprising called the Mutiny of Aranjuez, which honestly sounds like a Shakespearean musical, but it's dead serious. The people drag Godoy out of literally and force Charles IV to abdicate. You'd think that would make Ferdinand king on the spot, right? Not quite. Napoleon shows up with a smirk and an army. He invites Ferdinand to meet him in Bayonne, France, under the pretense of helping smooth the transition. Ferdinand, not being the brightest goblet in the cabinet, agrees, and boom, he's arrested. Napoleon places his own brother, Joseph Bonaparte, on the Spanish throne instead. Let that sink in. Ferdinand betrays his father to get the crown, then gets tricked by Napoleon and loses it anyway. You're barely one section in, and this man's resume already reads like a poorly written soap opera. Now, here's a quirky side detail most people miss. While Ferdinand is in exile, he becomes obsessed with bird cages. He collects miniature ones, sketches elaborate designs, and even asks for a parrot, which he names Justice. Irony must have been the national bird. Historians still argue whether this obsession reflected a deeper psychological craving for control, or if he just liked things that couldn't fly away from him. But while you ponder that, remember this: the most perverted king in history hasn't even begun to explore his darker hobbies. You're still in the prelude. The real descent begins when Ferdinand comes back from France, with a bruised ego, a twisted sense of destiny, and an urgent need to prove he still matters. Oh yes, things are about to get much, much weirder. The velvet slippers are back, and so is Ferdinand. After 6 long years as Napoleon's royal prisoner guest, depending on how you squint, Ferdinand VII is finally on his way home to Spain. You trail behind his carriage as it bumps awkwardly over cracked stones and cheering crowds, though something in the air feels off. This isn't a triumphant return, it's a restoration soaked in uncertainty, and he knows it. Spain by now is exhausted. The Peninsular War has chewed through cities, traditions, and trust. Joseph Bonaparte, Napoleon's brother, wasn't exactly popular. Most Spaniards still call him Pepe Botella, Joe the Boozer. But in his wake, he left behind something dangerous: ideas. Enlightenment ideas, liberal constitutions, the kind of stuff that made monarchs sweat. And guess what? While Ferdinand was pouting in France, a liberal government in Cadiz drafted the 1812 Constitution, a bold, progressive document limiting royal power. Newspapers had blossomed. People debated politics in public squares. For the first time, Spain looked like it might wiggle free from absolute rule. So when Ferdinand steps off the boat in 1814, the country holds its breath. Will he embrace these reforms? Will he be a constitutional monarch? Will he at least pretend to read the thing? Spoiler, nope. You watch him ride through Madrid, waving stiffly like someone who's not sure whether he's greeting citizens or inspecting meat. Behind the mask of royal decorum, he's furious, humiliated, and maybe even more paranoid than before. In private, he calls the Constitution of Cadiz the scribblings of rebellious shopkeepers. His solution? Burn the whole liberal experiment to the ground. Within weeks, he abolishes the Constitution, imprisons its authors, and reinstates absolute monarchy like the last 6 years were just a dream. Not the romantic kind, more like the one where you're falling through royal ego and land in a torture chamber. Historians still argue whether this was the result of calculated manipulation or genuine ideological conviction. Either way, you're now watching a man determined to undo time itself, and he gets help, lots of it. Secret police, informants, underground cells beneath the palace where suspected liberals are questioned under dripping ceilings and flickering lanterns. It's said by 1815, simply owning a foreign newspaper could land you in prison. Owning 2? That's a beheading trial. But Ferdinand isn't content with just silencing books and critics. He wants to erase the idea that anyone besides him matters. And that leads us to a curious little room on the 3rd floor of the royal palace, guarded at all times, with no windows and a single velvet chair. The Salón de los Espejos, the mirror room. Here's where it gets weird. Ferdinand reportedly used this chamber to conduct interviews with potential palace staff, especially ladies in waiting. But the room had a trick. Every wall was covered in one-way mirrors. From behind them, trusted advisors, or sometimes just the king himself, would observe. If someone smiled too much, too little, or didn't bow at precisely the right moment, they were discarded like stale cake. Quirky fringe detail? At least one account from a dismissed maid claimed that the king used to test her reactions by dropping objects behind her to see if she'd flinch. Once it was a silver spoon. Another time, a live frog. Welcome to HR, 19th century edition. Of course, it wasn't just frogs he liked dropping. Around this time, Ferdinand begins assembling what one contemporary called his Midnight Cabinet, a private circle of loyalists, torturers, and sycophants who handled his darker pleasures. Some were priests, some were former actors. All were skilled at pretending everything was perfectly normal. You hear whispers about what happened in those late-night gatherings, costumed banquets, staged moral tests, and, let's just say, behavior that would have made even the French aristocracy blink twice. And remember, this is just the second act. Outside, the Spanish people are getting restless again. You peek through palace windows and see bread lines growing longer. The army's morale is crumbling. And across the Atlantic, Spain's colonies are slipping through its fingers. Argentina? Gone. Mexico? Revolting. Even Simon Bolivar, the guy leading independence in South America, once said Ferdinand never deserved to rule anything, except maybe a leaky rowboat. Still, the king does what he always does when things get too real. He hides. Behind embroidered curtains, in secret halls, or inside his sprawling collection of miniature paintings. Yes, that's your quirky tidbit of the day. Ferdinand collected hundreds of portraits of people with unusual noses. Some hooked, some flat, some allegedly chosen just to make him laugh. One footman swore the king once gave an entire military promotion based on someone's resemblance to a nose in paintings 204. But his policies? Less amusing. He revives the Inquisition. He bans secular education. He arrests professors. Even old statues of Enlightenment thinkers mysteriously vanish from public parks. One royal edict actually forbids excessive clapping at public gatherings because apparently enthusiasm itself is a political threat. Still, not everyone bends. In 1820, the military, yes, his own soldiers, rise up. It's called the Liberal Triennium. This time they force Ferdinand to accept the 1812 Constitution again, and for 3 glorious years, Spain tastes freedom. You'd think this would humble him, maybe soften his edges. But no, he waits, he whines, and he writes long letters to foreign kings begging for help. And in 1823, the Holy Alliance obliges. France invades, again. But this time, it's to restore the Spanish king. The army, called the 100,000 Sons of St. Louis, marches in like a divine vacuum cleaner and sucks up every liberal reform left in Spain. When Ferdinand returns to full power, he doesn't just undo the Constitution. He hunts down anyone who ever supported it. Trials, executions, exiles. One liberal politician was sentenced to 10 years in prison for owning a banned poem. You feel a chill. It's not the fan this time. By now, Ferdinand VII isn't just ruling Spain. He's suffocating it. And yet, his appetite for control isn't satisfied. Not even close. Because now he turns his attention to marriage. You glance at the palace garden where a pale young woman walks slowly under a lace parasol. She doesn't know it yet, but she's about to become Ferdinand's first queen, and the first victim in a bizarre royal pattern that will make you question the very nature of love, duty, and dynastic strategy. Brace yourself. You're heading into the Four Wives Club.